to do that. Thank you. And we'll see if it records well, and we'll put it on the YouTube channel. A bunch of people are asking if it was going to be recorded. We'll see what happens. 4 weeks, 6 p.m. to 7:30-ish, depending on how we go. There are notes on the website, Church at Home, Shelter Cove, Church at Home Facebook page, that is, and you're welcome to follow along. They're pretty basic. You probably will need a pen and paper for not only remembering things as I go fairly quickly, and you may want to email me some sort of question even directly. Now, my email is Kelley, K-E-L-L-E-Y, at inthecove.com. Okay? So that's Kelley, K-E-L-L-E-Y, at inthecove.com. And you're welcome to email me anything as you write it down and you have time tonight or tomorrow to, formulate your question in a better way. That would be terrific. You're welcome to do that. A couple preamble things. Number one, this is a theology class. So this is going to be pretty high level academic, well, it's a Bible college study is really what it is. These are things that I've learned over the years, and I'm using several different sources. I'll be flipping through my notes to make sure that I've got it right, because obviously I'm old and I don't remember all the things that I used to know about this particular topic. Just like any knowledge, if you don't use it all the time, you do in fact get rusty. I don't allow people to be, what's the word? Irritated, offended, stuff like that. I don't allow that. So if you're easily offended, it would be better for you actually to read the Encyclopedia Britannica on the topic than here, because at seminaries and things like that, there's a free flow of ideas and different people disagree. And I frankly like that because I think it helps me think, which is the stated goal of this particular class. It's not just to get you information, it's to cause you to think. And different people think differently, and different people present things differently. And often in dialogue anyway, in a normal classroom, people will state things not exactly in the best way. And I don't care how it's stated. It's kind of like prayer. You don't have to get your prayer exactly formulated just right. God hears it and understands it and takes it in, as is. So don't worry about that. And if you've never been to Bible college, well, this will be a first for you. And hopefully it will engender more learning and understanding, because I believe in lifelong learning. I want people to learn for a lifetime. So comparative religion, next time it will be, and if I get through the 12 that I have selected in 4 weeks, that'll be a big task actually, then that'll be great. If I go 1 extra week, it will be on denominations. That is, what do different denominations believe? There's a lot of misunderstanding about that. So I may tail this in if we get through it quicker, which I don't think we will. But I did front load it, so the big 4 are up front of religion, so we'll be covering those big 4 right now. So if you happen to miss one, just look for the recording, and if not, find somebody like Erin and Lori. They are both very intelligent young ladies who can give you notes because they are note takers typically. Yeah, outside of that, I think we'll just go ahead and jump in. First one on my list, page 1, is Buddhism. Let me just make sure I've got this. Buddhism. And if I miss a blank, just yell at me, because often I will go on tangents. And trust me, these outlines are are just generalized. You are going to need a pad of paper, or on the flip side of this, because we're not going to just fill in blanks, trust me. Okay, so the first one here is Buddhism. Now Buddhism, if you know anything at all about history, the Buddhism came from a reaction to Hinduism. Hinduism, which we'll talk about in this call, is a Eastern religion. Let's just call it that way. One could call it Eastern mysticism. And that's because often in all these Eastern religions, there isn't really a defined concept of a almighty monotheistic God. There's usually a lot of mystical approach. As far as who the key founder is, the guy's name is Siddhartha. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. Siddhartha, Siddhartha. He is in the 6th century or so. There's a lot of query as to whether or not which one was really the Buddha. That was what he was called. Most of it ran 500 BCE. Now, let me just explain one thing. Again, this is very academic, but BCE is the common way that academic people talk about time. BCE is called before the Common Era. BCE. We used to call it BC, that is before Christ. AD, the year of the Lord, would be anything above 0. So you'd have 0, birth of Christ, and before that would be called BC. It is now BC. Now it's called BCE. Capital B, capital C, capital E. And if you ever go to Washington, D.C., you'll see every museum will have BCE, or it will have CE, which is called Common Era. Common Era it's basically the same thing. It basically means AD, but academics don't use AD or BC anymore, probably because they are more or less biased against Christianity and anything to do with religion. But so when I say BCE, I'm talking about before Christ. So this guy is running, he dies somewhere in 483 BCE. But there's some people who think that he's actually earlier than that. So it'd be like in the 350s. Either way, the bottom line is he's 300 to 400 years before Christ. And he's called the Buddha. Buddha never wanted his reaction to Hinduism to be a religion. His followers made it into that. Buddha, otherwise known as the Enlightened One. I'm going to start calling Jeremy that, the Enlightened One. Is founded in modern day Nepal and northern India. It is definitely a reformation of Hindu. Now, Hindu is the oldest religion in the world. There's nothing recorded that is earlier than Hinduism. Now, remember, Hinduism in and of itself is a term that the British gave that. It was called something way different until the 19th century, which we'll get to when we talk about it. On your outline, the key writings, well, the problem with this is there isn't a key writing. There are many key writings. Buddhism is fragmented into lots of sects, and same thing with Hinduism. I'll spell it for you. Mahavastu, Mahavastu, otherwise known as the Great Story, is more or less a chaotic collection covering the Buddhists, what do you call it? The Buddhist's life. That's basically what it is. It's kind of like an autobiography in many degrees. There's another one called the Jataka, Jataka, Jataka. I've always liked that name. Jataka Tales. There's 550 stories. Now don't take this weird, but there are 550 stories of the Buddha's previous lives because they believe in reincarnation. So all these stories are ones that he remembers from his past lives. 550 of them. They're called the Jataka Tales. And then the one that I'm most familiar with is called the Tripitaka. That is Please mute your, here, I'll do it for you. Never mind. I'm muting everybody. Make sure they're all muted. There you go. Where was I? Oh, the Tripitaka. That's Trip, Tripitaka, Tripitaka. Say that 10 times fast. Otherwise known as the three baskets. Now, the reason why I bring this one up is because it is the most widely accepted by the most Buddhists there are. The triple baskets, and I know this, again, it's going to sound weird. The triple baskets is 11 times the length of the Bible. 11 times. So if you can imagine, and it's not just one, this is just their main one because they've got lots of them, of different key writings. I just want you to understand how complicated Buddhism really is. No wonder they need to be reincarnated 50 times to get through the silly book. I don't know about you, but it's taken me a lifetime to get through the Bible, and I have 3 master's degrees. It doesn't, it takes forever to get it all down academically anyway. So anyway, my point is that the triple baskets are the main thing that that Buddhists believe in and study. The triple baskets. On your outline, I've said who is God, for those of you who downloaded it from the website. Buddha did not believe in the existence of God per se. It's not quite like that. It's more like this. It's a universal consciousness. He would argue that each and every one of us are a part of God. Now, I'm going to give you 2 big words you can look up later. One of them is called pantheism. That is, God is in all things. Or another phrase that Disney seems to be enthralled with because they put it in every cartoon they ever do. It's called panentheism. That is, that God's in inanimate objects like trees, a la Pocahontas, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I love Disney, but I hate Disney because they are so mystical in everything they do. And of course, George Lucas lovelily put Star Wars in there and put a panentheistic thing about using, quote, the Force. Yeah, well, whatever. That is a Hindu thought called Brahman, and we'll talk about that when we hit the Hindu line. So almost all of movies and TV shows have some sort of mystical systems in it. They avoid Christianity like the plague, even though it represents something like 1 billion people in the United States, or in the world. So who is God? God is an enlightenment. It's a spiritual thing, force, if you will, that's throughout the world, all living things. And he gets this from Hinduism, which believes that as well, which we'll talk about that. Generally speaking, Buddhism does not recognize Jesus in any sense or in any way. If they do, they call him an enlightened teacher. So that's all he is. Now, one of the things that is found in apologetics is this idea that Jesus is just a good teacher. Well, I got news for you. That's the last thing he is. Jesus is a lousy teacher, only in the sense that, are you kidding me? He says, hey, if you want to follow, Luke 14:30, if you want to follow me, you got to give everything away. If you want to follow me, you got to pick up a cross. If you're going to follow me, you've got to eat of my body, eat of my blood. What? If he's not God, man, you're talking about some serious narcissism here that is very difficult to follow unless you are a true God. I mean, that's the bottom line. Make sure that you're muted, everybody. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. All right. Brenda. I just noticed Brenda. Brenda, are you from Maryland? I don't think she can hear me. Okay, it's frozen. Anyway, so just so you know, Jesus is just an enlightened teacher for the most part. In Asia, especially in Asia Minor and in the northeastern side of India, you will find that Buddhists believe that Jesus is, and I'm quoting now, and you're thinking, no way. I'm quoting. Jesus is an avatar for Brahman or God himself. Do you understand? So just so you understand this, an avatar is basically a hologram. Now, for those of you who've taken any theology classes from me, you'll know what a hologram represents. It's from Gnosticism. That is that God emanates his being to earth, even though no God is really significant, has no immanence. It's all transparent, transcendent hologram. In other words, when Jesus walked on earth, it was just as if he was walking on earth. That's what the Gnostics believed, because they thought that God could not be anywhere near evil, and obviously mankind is evil. So therefore, God in Jesus's form wasn't really in flesh and blood, which we can talk about that another day. Gnosticism is what Galatians is fighting against. Actually, you could argue Colossians is too. And Buddhists don't believe that there's anything called a Holy Spirit. However, they do believe that there is a spirit, and this is all under the heading of who is God. They practice there's no way to explain this easily, but they practice a deity yoga. It's where they get into a state, a sense of nothingness, so that they can become one with that force that's running around the world as the force of what you and I would call a God, but it's not a personal God in any sense. Okay? How do you be saved? Well, there are, and I'll explain this more later, but the big ticket item that the Westerners have always called it is called nirvana. Nirvana is the heaven, if you will, in our Christian worldview. Nirvana is defined as nothingness, absolute nothingness. The allegory that Buddha used and Buddha's people used had to do with a raindrop. It's raining where I am right now, and it's going into my pool back there. And they would say that the whole point of Buddhism is to reduce and eliminate individuality. So a raindrop, you're a raindrop, you're falling from the sky, you hit the ground, and you become one with a creek or a stream, and then you flow into a river, and then you flow that into the ocean. The ocean represents nirvana. It's where you lose all individuality and you become one with the mass. That's exactly how you're saved. There's a thing called an Eightfold Path, which I'll explain in detail here in a second. And I just have to tell you that Eightfold Path is quite ritualistic, which is typical of Eastern mysticism. The death, what happens after death? Well, obviously reincarnation. People do not have individual souls in Buddhism. You just have desires and feelings that can be reincarnated into another person or object, like an animal. So I want to stop there before I go farther into the other facts and beliefs things. Any questions you got here? Can you hear all right? All that kind of stuff. Any questions whatsoever? You're good, Bill? I saw the thumbs up. Okay. Hey, Scott. Efren, does anybody have a question? If you do, just go ahead and unmute by hitting your space bar. Okay, then I'm going to continue on in Buddhism. So I want to give you a few definitions. You might want to flip the page over if you got the outline, and I'm going to flip it and give you some pretty academic stuff here. And some history with Buddhism, because Buddhism is a big stinking deal, even though in the United States it's not anywhere near as powerful per se. Hinduism probably a little bit stronger. But nirvana, let's start with that. Buddhists would consider nirvana to be transcendent freedom. To be very clear, just realize this: existence is painful. Buddha said that life is a pain, and that we are to be avoiding suffering, and ultimately the satisfying character of human life, which almost always is going to be dissatisfying. And why is it dissatisfying? Because you and I are constantly looking to improve, but we are in fact immanent, and we are changing all the time. He was wanting to find an eightfold path about being called. 8:50. I'm being called on my iPad. That's just okay. I don't know where. I don't even see it, but I hear it. Oh well. So just so you understand, nirvana is transcendent freedom. There's a thing called Atman, A-T-M-A-N, Atman, and it means to be yourself. That's an important term in the triple baskets. Another one, yoga, you've heard about it before. The word actually means union, and it's where you get yourself in a meditative state where you're unified with the power of the world or the universe. Karma is something you've maybe heard of. Karma is causality. That means that as you interact, either good or bad, it delivers kind of a deposit on your scale of good or bad for your next life. So when you have bad karma, that means your next life, you may end up coming back as a cat. Can you imagine? Ew. Or you may do such a great job, you may come back as some enlightened yogi. And a yogi is somebody who has come much farther in his reincarnation process. Samsara is the technical name for the reincarnation business. They don't call it reincarnation. Again, a lot of the things we say about Buddhism and Hinduism and Eastern mysticism is all Western thinking. They look at it completely different. This is called eternal recurrence, just so you understand. In fact, they call it becoming in one of the sect things. Now, a yogi is a miracle-working ascetic, somebody who puts away all things that are pleasureful, kind of like the monks in LAX that you see running around giving out flowers for money. You hardly ever see them express emotion, right? And the reason is that if a Buddhist is near suffering, it's automatically bad karma. So in Bangladesh, it used to be called East Pakistan. When Bangladesh was going through the floods and all that kind of thing, remember that back in the 70s? They were killing people left and right. You never saw Buddhist relief organizations. You'll never see a Buddhist relief organization because they can't be near suffering. You follow? That's why it's called the Red Cross, because Christians go to where people are hurting. Buddhists do not. It's against their mantra. I'm not going to bother you with all that. Buddhism has a group of people inside of it that think that they're the highest of the Buddhists. They are expressed in a thing called a sutra, S-U-T-R-A, a sutra. And sutras, as a general rule, is a advanced teaching that the Buddha purportedly made to his more advanced disciples when he was living. And so they call them sutras. And only the most, and when we get to Scientology, you'll see that Scientology has copied some of this that is only available to the highest of the forms, if you will. Forms of disciples. So karma, different people think different things. Remember, there's 1 billion Buddhists in the world, and there's lots and lots of different varieties of Buddhists. But karma, generally speaking, is an avoidance of suffering, right? But it also can easily be said that karma is that belief that virtuous behavior, actions, create pleasure in the future. In other words, the reason why they do anything good for anybody is because they're rooting for their reincarnation to be, well, better than what they are today. And they have different levels of reincarnation into different animals and or people. And believe me, when you read anything about Hinduism, and of course Buddhism is a reaction of it, there's this thing called a caste system. C-A-S-T-E, caste system, where once you're born into that caste system, you cannot get out of it. There's no upward mobility or downward mobility for that matter. You are to stay in your caste, your lane of the free way of life, if you will. And Buddhists definitely thought that, though they were irritated from it. And that's one reason why they formed what they formed. But karma is this idea that virtuous actions create pleasure in the future, and non-virtuous actions create pain in the future for their, in fact, not only in their future current life, but also in their reincarnation life. Okay? So what is Buddhism all about? Buddhism is about this idea that human suffering is ultimately formed from the dissatisfying character of human life. In fact, that's a quote out of one of the sutras, is existence is painful, and the conditions that make the individual are precisely those who rise to dissatisfaction and suffering. In other words, your individualistic desire causes you suffering, and he thought we needed to eliminate it. He said that dissatisfaction and suffering comes from individualistic characteristics, and individuality implies limitation. That's one reason why you will see a Buddhist monk and they will all look alike, and they'll all talk alike, and they'll all have a certain pitch in their voice, because they believe that limitation is important to get rid of the suffering in your world and or the desire. Remember, according to them, desire causes suffering. So they believe, since all things desired are transitory, of which they're right, by the way, often a lot of religions are right in some form or fashion, and in that one they're exactly right. Life is in fact transitory. Everything, you can work forever and get yourself all hyped up to some status and then realize that this is all very dissatisfying. Remember Christmas? You were all excited for Christmas. You got your Christmas present when you were a kid. Yay! 3 months later, yeah, you're dissatisfied. And that was his whole point. It's dissatisfying. Life in itself is dissatisfying. And therefore, if you're going to live amid the impermanence of life, this life is always transitioning. It's never staying the same. You know, E equals mc squared, to quote Einstein, as compared to Newtonian physics, where everything is static. Einstein said everything's not static at all. Everything's moving constantly. Nothing is the same. Nothing is it's all changing all the time, everywhere. Well, Buddha argued that yes, there's no impermanence of everything. Therefore, everything is impermanent. Therefore, humans need to search for a way of deliverance out of this transitoriness of nature, of themselves. In short, that search for getting away from the changes of human being is called enlightenment. And when you're enlightened, you no longer have despair. And that's where they get the concept of no self. That's a quote, no-self. and there are 5 aggregates to self. I won't bore you with it. If you want it, you can email me about it. But there are 4 noble truths in Buddhism. And here they are. The truth, number 1, is the truth of misery. Life is miserable. Number 2, the truth that misery originates within the craving for pleasure. The very fact that you, that we all, what do you call it? Crave things in and of itself, that originates misery. And they got a good point. People are just, kind of on the rat wheel thing, the hamster wheel. They're spinning their wheels, and they think it's going to, satisfy, and it doesn't. Number 3, the truth that this craving can be eliminated. They believe that this craving, this for desire, can be eliminated. And that's one reason why you go to yoga. That's one reason why you go to TM, Transcendental Meditation. That's one reason why you engage, my friends, in the whole idea of being nothing, is to get rid of that desire. And number 4, the truth that this elimination, this restriction of craving, is the result of following a path. Those are called the 4 noble truths: the truth of misery, the truth that misery originates with the craving of pleasure. Number 3, the truth that this craving can be eliminated, that it's possible to eliminate it. And number 4, the truth that this elimination is the result of following the path. Now the question is, what's the path? And the path is called the Eightfold Path of Righteousness. So here they are in order. This is the Eightfold Path. No wonder you need stinking 50 lives or 550. You got to get through these. And by the way, there's 10 fetters I'm not even going to tell you about. There are 10 fetters that stop you. This is Scientology 101. If those of you who know anything about Scientology, which we will touch on in this class. Remember, we're doing this for 4 weeks, and we may have a 5th week if I can't get denominations in there. The Eightfold Path goes like this. And it's real simple. Number 1, right view. It's right out of A.W. Tozer. You have to have a right view of the world. Number 2, right aspirations. That's what he called it, aspirations. If you aspire towards nothing, you are good. Number 3, right speech. They believe that speech matters. I agree with that. I think speech matters. You can talk yourself into almost anything. I certainly know that your attitude matters. It matters in your health. It matters in your, everything. Number 4, right conduct. They believed in holy conduct according to the triple baskets. That is how one is to live. Number 5 is right livelihood. Again, they thought that livelihood, right job, use our term, but it's livelihood. And they would argue that some livelihoods are not worth the bad karma that you get from it. Right livelihood. So as a general rule, in a Buddhist world, it's all extremely simple. Now, there was a TV show, for those of you who are ancient like myself, you might have remembered it. It was a guy that was wandering around the West, and he was just trying to find himself, find Brahman or find one of these Eastern religion forces. It was called Kung Fu, and it was David Carradine. Stupidest show on the planet, but it was all this, that was pure Buddhism. Pure Buddhism. If you can find it somewhere and watch an episode, or if you can stand it, that is, because it's so cheesy, it's ridiculous. But it really, you're right. You guys all remember that, huh? Right. Well, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, that was, everybody wanted to be like David Carradine, who could, take a bullet and not even flinch and do his little kung fu action on the bad guys and change the world, if you will. Well, anyway, the bottom line is right livelihood matters. And he would go around helping people, but he was just a man of the street, do whatever he felt like. In our day and age, that's not as easy, right? Number 6 is right effort. They believe that your effort has to be aimed at making this force known through your own life. In other words, it'd be kind of like evangelism by our living. It would be that kind of sort of thing. Number 7 is right mindfulness. They argued that your mind is the key to life, and if your mind is sharp, you will be sharp. And for those of you who remember The Karate Kid, you would remember that movie where the focus, always about focus. Focus was everything. Well, that's a Buddhistic principle, and that's exactly where they got it. Is Mr. Yoshi, or whatever that guy's name was, the instructor dude, he was clearly in some sort of Eastern mysticism, and it was all about focus. You could conquer anything if you were focused. Well, I kind of think that that's probably true. Focus has a lot to do with it. I mean, look at Olympic athletes. They focus for 8 hours a day for 4 years, and they go to Olympics. I don't have that kind of focus, so ergo, I'm not going. And number 8, the big one is right meditational attainment. Now, normal yoga in the United States has none of this stuff. It's all, it's the flying dragon and the barking dog and all those things that I don't know all the different forms that they use, but I know that it's part of the yoga formation. I had a friend of mine in Annapolis who he went with his wife because his wife insisted, and they went on something called hot yoga, where they turn up the heat in the room to 90 degrees, and you have to do these yoga stance things. He lost a lot of weight doing it. He also lost his mind doing it, but it was quite entertaining to hear him tell me about hot yoga. I don't have any trouble with yoga, actually, because it's kind of like anything else. It all depends on what you're using it for, right? But in a Buddhist standpoint, yoga is a big deal. Big deal. Meditational attainment. Okay? Let me give you one more thing and then we'll be done with Buddhism. It's this state of being enlightened as a human being and going through your steps, and the 8th one being nirvana, and getting to the absolute nothingness, and going through your reincarnated lives, breaking your 10 fetters, following the 4 noble paths, following after this book that's 11 times bigger than the Bible. That state, when you finally get there, is called several different things in different sects of the Buddhist religion. One is called a harbor of refuge. Another one's called a cool cave. Another one is called the place of bliss. And another one is called the farther shore. Interesting little term. Nirvana is basically something that the West called it. And of course, Kurt Cobain, and he named his lovely band, who I have a wild story about Kurt Cobain, who some of my kids in Seattle met and got a cassette tape from Kurt Cobain, came into my office, put it on. They lived in West Seattle and were coming out of a garage, and they recorded this thing. And it was awful. Sounded like cats being bludgeoned to death. And so I threw it out of my office, and they went and ran and got the tape, said, "You wait, they're going to be big." Yeah, right. Well, they don't got any talent. Well, you just remember the name. Yeah, what's that? Nirvana. Yeah, okay, whatever. Man, if I had that tape today, I could pay off the church building with that thing. That was one of their very first recordings in their garage. Oh, man, some of the decisions you make in life, just one little decision. If I would have just put it in my... Okay. Anyway, nirvana is more or less a term of the West. It as I said before, translated, it means to be passing away or dying out. Now, Buddha repudiated any thought of wanting to be non-existent, however. He didn't like that thought at all. He looked at it for more of a positive. Okay? So there you go. You got all sorts of stuff for Buddhism. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments, you're welcome to speak up just by hitting your space bar if you have a computer, or unhooking your mute and you can speak. I'll give you 30 seconds.
So, Star Wars and the Force.
The Force.
What's your Buddhism? Yeah. I'll unmute now.
Okay. Well, Star Wars is just an Eastern mysticism. A lot of people are thinking, well, Star Wars is Christian. No, it's not. Come on. Please don't be goofy. It is 100% Eastern in its mysticism. The Force is going to be with you. Use the Force, Luke. The Force in Hinduism is called Brahman, and that's exactly what this thing is Brahman. The Force is all around us. We are, in fact, part of the Force. Let the Force be with you. Get rid of hate. What's to get rid of hate? Remember in Return of the Jedi, when Obi-Wan was trying to tell him to go through that mystical muck with Yoda, and he has to get rid of the hate. Let the hate flow from you. Remember the stupid emperor guy wanted the hate to flow from him? That's because he knew he couldn't enlighten himself when hate was with him. Well, that's a Buddhistic term through and through. Get rid of your emotion. That's one thing I get really kind of irritated in Christian circles, where they argue that we are to get rid of our emotion. Well, that's not true. Christians are supposed to be emotive left and right. No problem with that. It's just it's uncontrolled emotive that I have a trouble with. But you're not supposed to be like a Buddhist where you just don't ever emote anything. That's silly. Okay, next one, Judaism. We switch gears from more or less a non-God oriented thing to a monotheistic religion. And let me just give you the blanks so that you have the blanks set. Obviously, Judaism, you could argue where it starts, but most people in Judaism would argue that Abraham is the beginner, the founder of it. Give or take, that's about 2000 BC, depending on how you view all this stuff. Moses is also very big in Judaism in their world. It starts in the Middle East. There are three main versions of Judaism. One's called Orthodox, one's called Conservative, and one's called Reform. So just so you know, Judaism is split pretty heavily in those three things. The Orthodox ones are the guys with the black hats. They're flipping around Jerusalem, especially in East Jerusalem. You'll see them all over the place. They're very unhappy people. I can tell you that. Very unhappy. Most of American Jews are Reform oriented, and they follow their Judaism very loosely and nowhere near as strongly as what the biblical version is. And I've got a lot to say about that. What is the writings, I guess, is on your outline here. It's called the Tanakh, Tanakh. It's the Old Testament in our terms, especially the Torah. The Torah, Torah, is the first 5 books of the Old Testament of the Bible. And there's another one called the Talmud, Talmud. Now, the Talmud is like a commentary on the Torah. So these are old writings that give explanation of all the Old Testament, but especially the Torah. Each branch of Judaism have their own teachings, and there's several sages involved. And the names don't matter. The point is they all have main characters, just like Islam does, that are authoritative in their different sect. Okay. One thing that you could probably find more out if you're really interested in Judaism and their religion side, not just the Old Testament, because it's much, much, much more complex than just the Old Testament. But there's an organization called Jews for Jesus, and look them up, website, And I am absolutely sure they have information galore for anything to do with Judaism. Who's God? God is spirit. To an Orthodox Jew, God is personal, all-powerful, eternal, compassionate. Those are 4 big words in the Orthodox Jew world. To other Jews, however, God is unknowable, impersonal, and defined in a many ways, and there's no Trinity whatsoever. It's, well, Deuteronomy 6:4, you know that one, the most famous verse in all of Israel. Hear, O God, hear, O Israel, thy God is one. Deuteronomy 6:4. I have it inscribed in Hebrew in one of my rings that I wear from time to time. If you see me with a Hebrew ring, that's exactly what it is. Jesus is more or less seen as either an extremist false messiah or a good but modernly martyred Jewish rabbi. So it all depends on which sect you're a part of. Many Jews do not even consider Jesus at all. It doesn't even cross their mind. And obviously there are folks that are called Messianic Jews that deal with the Messiah aspect of Jesus quite strongly. Orthodox Jews believe that Messiah will restore the Jewish kingdom and eventually rule the earth. I could go on and on about what that kingdom means, because the kingdom is a big deal because of their history. Remember, the kingdom wasn't exactly God's first choice, but he went ahead with Saul, followed by Solomon, followed by David, followed by Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And the split kingdom really was a mess, an absolute mess. It's kind of like if you talk to a Korean and the split peninsula of the Korea, just nobody wants it. Well, it's the same kind of thing. Nobody wanted the split kingdom of Jerusalem, Samaria, I forget what the other one was, Dan, etc. But it did happen, and they really don't like that. Some Jews think that there is a thing called the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is another name for God's activity on earth, and that's the way they perceive that. Others in Jewish sects believe that the Holy Spirit is God's love and or power when interacting for God's purposes. But none of the Jews believe that the Holy Spirit is a person of the Godhead. Salvation, how do you be saved? According to Jewish rules, etc. And again, it all depends on which one you're at. But some Jews believe that prayer, repentance, and obeying the law are necessary for salvation. Some do that. Others believe that salvation is, quote, improvement of society, unquote. Now, if you've never been to New York, the New York Jews are just like that. That's one reason why most of them are left-wing in their approach. They believe in feeding people, housing people, all that stuff, mainly because they think that's the way you get saved. Isn't that interesting, huh? Because we've got the same problem in the Protestant world. There's a whole bunch of people who think that the whole gospel is just about building houses and feeding and clothing people. It's called the social gospel, when in fact it's far more than that, obviously. Galatians 1:6 would tell you that, because Paul was pretty irritated with the Galatians about that whole concept. The gospel is the good news of Jesus for the spiritual need of man, not the physical. Physical comes and goes, but the spiritual matters more than the physical in normal Christian theology. But quite a bit of high churches have changed that and decided that the gospel and evangelism means nothing, and the only thing that does matter is, in quote, improving society. And by the way, for those of you who like end times theology, that kind of stuff, eschatology is what it's called. You can look this up. It's called post-millennialism. And it basically means that our job as a Christian is to make the world a utopia for when Christ comes back, it's perfect. Post-millennialism took a hit after World War II. Oops, it's not getting better after all. Mankind is inherently evil. Oops, bummer. So post-millennialism is rarely talked about at this point. Not anymore, anyway. Where was I? Salvation, right? Yeah, okay. Death, what happens after death? There will be a physical resurrection, according to most Jews. The obedient will live forever with God. Now notice, I've always asked my Jewish friends, I'm going, now where's the line for, quote, the obedient? I mean, obedient in what? All the rules, or is it like the holiness side of it? Anyway, they never can give me a good answer on that one. The unrighteous will suffer. Some Jews do not believe in a conscious life after death. Can you guys hear my dogs? They're going crazy. I guarantee you there's somebody walking across the road right now, and they have bionic hearing. It's ridiculous. Lori, you have dogs. I know that must happen to you. And you live near me all the time. Yeah, people walk in this. We live in the college district, and there's just nothing but walkers, and there's also a ton of homeless guys running around our alleys. Heard one this morning. He was telling somebody to get away from. It's a long story, but the bottom line is I went on a ride along with the Modesto Police Department at night when I first got here, and I got to talk to some of these homeless guys, and they tell me that every alley is mapped. I didn't know that. They actually have, like, somebody owns my alley back here. So nobody's supposed to go through the garbage cans here except that guy. Weird. Who knew? Who knew? He's a nice guy though, because he keeps all the garbage inside the garbage cans. And the others, he's flipping it all over the place, but not mine. I don't know why. Maybe he knows I'm a pastor. Everybody on the block knows what I do, and he knows all about you guys too, Shelter Cove. Okay, where was I? Okay, any questions? I'm going to go on then more on Judaism and other practices, but speak up if you got any questions. The term for eternal recurrence back in Buddhism is reincarnation. That's what they call it, eternal recurrence. Whoever asked it. Oh, Jill. Okay. Okay, you guys ready? Okay. So in Judaism, Judaism is broken up into hundreds and hundreds of years, right? I want you to understand that I'm not going to talk to you about any part of the Judeo story prior to 200 BCE. And the reason why is because you can look it up in the Old Testament. There's lots of commentaries about that. But the part that many, many commentators never talk about is the part that happened between the time that Malachi wrote and the time that John the Baptist shows up. There's 400 some odd years there that the Jews did all sorts of things. And it set up a lot of Christianity things. That the history of the Jews, and I'll give you a couple phrases that you should probably, if you're into this kind of stuff, knowing. The Maccabees, looking up the Maccabees, M-A-C, and I can't remember how, it's M-A-C-C, I think, A-B-E-E, Maccabees. Those guys set Jesus up for the whole thing, and I'll explain that in a minute. So bottom line is the Greeks take over, 332 BCE, Alexander the Great takes over the world. I believe Alexander the Great to be the greatest ruler of history. There's nobody bigger or better. He dies at 32 years old, and he takes over the entire stinking world. And I got all sorts of stories about this, but One that sticks out is one where he comes up to a walled gate and he asks for the king. The king comes to the gate and says, hey, you need to surrender. And the king goes, why would I surrender? I'm behind a fortress. And Alexander, and if you've seen any of the movies, they kind of recondition, they're yelling at each other across the gate, snaps his fingers, and a whole row of soldiers marched off the cliff that fortress was on. And the king yelled down to his people, open the gate, open the gate. Why, sir, why? We're behind the fortress. If his soldiers will do that on his command, they won't stop until we're dead. And he opened the gate. Alexander the Great was not only a brilliant tactician, but he, for whatever reasons, held quite sway with people. And they followed him wherever he went. Dying at 32, though. Interesting. Anyway, he took over Palestine. Palestine was Greekified in the 3rd century or so BCE. And the reason why I say that is because people started Hellenizing different countries. Hellenizing meaning they would take Greek philosophy, Greek law, Greek thinking, Greek everything, and put it into their society. Well, Jerusalem was no different. I know this sounds crazy, and you can look this up. There's a guy by the name of Jason, and he is the Greek-oriented Jerusalem leader, and he Hellenized. He was a high priest, I think, in the 170s BCE, before Christ. And in it, he took all the Greek philosophy and thought and laws and stuff and put it inside the establishment and the institution of the Jewish world. Some of the Jews didn't like that, and there was a civil war. This is right between 160 and 175, give or take, 15 years of civil war. And the Syrian king, which is, I don't know if you know this, but Israel was a part of Syria. Even in World War I, Syria owned Israel, Palestine. During this time, right before Christ, the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes comes along, and he backs the one side of it against Jason and takes over this. And just so you know, there's a revolt against that Syrian, whatever you call it, Syrian rule. And those guys were called the Maccabees. And there were 5 sons. And they revolted against Rome later and won. They revolted against Greece and won. And they revolted against Syria and won. These guys are pretty ferocious dudes. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll see one particular volume that describes this mess. Well, anyway, during the Hellenization of Jerusalem, the priests were not only the most powerful political party in Israel, but also the richest. The priests were filthy rich. In fact, catch this. Oh, and by the way, you can look this up. It's Oniad, O-N-I-A-D, Oniad family. It was a kind of a despotic situation. Catch this. The temple at that point was used as a bank. Private individuals would bring money into God's holy temple, and that's where they would keep it, like a bank, believe it or not. It truly, as Josephus once wrote, that particular time, Jerusalem, Judea was a theocracy at that point. A little bit of God, a little bit of government, very interesting stuff. Well, make a long story short, a middle-class group rose up against these guys, these Hellenistic Jews that had turned, well, Jerusalem into Greek world. And those guys were called the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were middle-class scholars that wanted to return to the Bible, in particular, the Torah, the first 5 books. And they, they revolted against the Greek rule of these other folks. So the Pharisees, otherwise known as separatists, became the middle-class Jewish scholars, and there's a group called Hasidic Jews. Hasidic Jews are crazy. I've ran into them. They represent about 6% of Israel population, and they are fanatics. Well, anyway, they joined with those guys against the Hellenizers, and in fact, of course, they were doing it for religious grounds, not political. And that is the whole idea of why the Pharisees were established when Jesus finally gets there. Remember, the Pharisees are the middle class commoner. The Sadducees are the upper class aristocracy. When they created the Sanhedrin, which you've probably heard about in the Bible somewhere, Sanhedrin, that is a combination. It's kind of like a Congress of high class and lower middle class. So it's very fascinating that all of this happened. Now, another character that you can look up if you like this kind of stuff, the guy's name is Hillel, Hillel. He's the leader of some of these dudes, of the chief Pharisees. In particular, the Pharisees were worried about the oral law. And later on, they create Pharisaical laws that were very specific, and there were 600 and some odd, I can't remember the number, 600 of some odd different laws that they established outside the Old Testament that the Jewish people had to follow in order to, maintain the oral law of Moses. Okay, so what did Pharisees believe? There's some theological differences, and it caused a wreck inside the Jewish leadership when the Rome took over, right? And Jesus used that wreck and several of his little comments in between, in particular about the resurrection. So Pharisees, according to my notes, believe in providential guidance of the universe. In other words, God cares about man. In angels, Pharisees believed in angels. Pharisees believed that there would be a reward and punishment in heaven and hell. To the world to come is the way they put it. And they believed that people resurrected from the dead at the end of days and the judgment. Everything I just said there, Sadducees did not believe. They didn't believe any of that. Sadducees were very, very, very conservative and mainly political in nature. And they didn't buy the angel thing. They didn't buy the resurrection thing. They didn't buy that there'd be a good and judgment against the evil, all that. Very fascinating, huh? And that's the ruling class that Jesus went up against. Now, just so you know, this Hellenistic period is the way the Pharisees were structured through the Hellenistic models of religious and social associations. So when Nicodemus comes, when Gamaliel talks in Acts 4, that's all from the Hellenistic period because it's all set up for that. Okay? Argument, debate, comment? I could go on, but let me just tell you this. Judaism to the Sadducees was centered around the temple. The Pharisees centered it around the rules. By 70 AD, call it CE as we call it now in academic world, the Pharisees had taken over total control and the Sadducees were eliminated from Jerusalem's life. You don't read anything about Sadducees post 70 CE. They are more or less eliminated through a civil discourse of the Pharisees. For us, you and I, if you know anything about American history, you know that the Whig Party, W-H-I-G, was eliminated because of slavery and its interaction with the Democrat Party. And the Republicans came out of the Whig Party because the Republicans were 100% against slavery in all forms, whereas the Whigs kind of playing around with the political side of it. And the Democrats were all for slavery because all of the South was Democratic, whereas all the North was, well, it was a combination of Whig, WHIG, W-H-I-G. Okay, arguments, debates. What time we got? I can't even see. I still can't see. Okay, well, we will, in this particular class, we are just going to go until 7:30 hits. Yeah, before Common Era, so I'm just, right, yes. Before Common Era is the replacement of BC now. That's only an academic world. There's no reason to play with it. If you go to Jerusalem, you will see nothing but that. You know, from on all the museums. If you go to DC in particular, you'll see that. Okay, so let me make sure I got the right thing. Okay. Let's talk about Hinduism. Hinduism, as I said, oldest religion, and it's the forerunner of Buddhism. There is no founder of Hinduism. None that we know of. So on your outline, founder, none. It begins in earnest in 1800 BCE in India. We don't know exactly when, but there's remnants of Hinduism all the way to 4000 BC. What are the key writings? They're called Vedas, V-E-D-A-S, Veda. There's a lot of writings in the Hindu world. The Vedas and the thing called the Bhagavad Gita is the number one. It's BHAGAVAD-GITA. The one thing you'll notice in all of Hinduism is you can't pronounce any of it. I mean, it is just long, big syllabalistic words that just have no possible English variant that can be said. There is 1 billion Hindus in the world. 80% of India, which has I think 1.2 billion, what do you call it? Population, 80% are Hindu in some form. So you can see that Hinduism and India go together. Now remember, India's also got the caste system, C-A-S-T-E. And when you're a king, a princess, a high-end merchant, you're not allowed to interact with somebody who's a waitress, a farmer, or any of that. It's a different caste. You're not even allowed to. That's why so many different movies have been played with these people who fall in love between two castes. They're not allowed, not in families. And I mean, they're disavowed. In some cases, they're killed. If you go into a relationship with somebody who's a different caste, your family has the permission to kill you, just like in Islam. You can lose your life. So you're supposed to stay within your class of people. And class warfare, by the way, has been around for world history forever. We're in the middle of it right now in the United States, class warfare. Things are made up to divide people rather than for political gain. God is called the absolute. That's a quote. The absolute. What's the absolute? The absolute is a force called Brahman. Brahman. And everyone is a part of Brahman. You are part of it. I'm a part of it. And it's like that drops of the sea thing that I talked about. Most people are not aware they're part of Brahman, according to Hindu philosophy, but you are regardless. And the people that are adherents to Hinduism worship Brahman. Well, since it's in everything and everyone, guess what? I could go worship that tree out there that my wife, I got like 5 billion trees around here. My wife's a horticulturist person. So I've got flowers and stuff. Every one of them could be a god. I forget the recognized number, but I think it's 330 million gods in Hinduism that is recognized today. So literally, if you worship your significant other, well, there you go. You're Hindu because they're part of Brahman. Yeah, see, Jennifer, you can just look right over there and just kind of go like that. I'm not worthy. Anyway, that's what reason why Hindus have so many statues. There's statues everywhere because they represent some form of Hindu deity. Jesus Christ in Hinduism is a guru, a enlightened teacher. Now this is going to get really complicated, and I really don't want to bore you with only having 10 minutes of this to do it, but Jesus is a Vishnu, V-I-S-H-N-U, Vishnu. Vishnu is this idea of being the incarnation of the embodiment of Brahman. Vishnu is a body representative of Brahman in the force. He is the Son of God, just like I'm the Son of God. His death doesn't atone for sin. It doesn't rise from the dead or any of that kind of stuff. Just realize this is the main thing to remember in Hinduism. They're very pluralistic. Everything has multiple sources of not only writings, but multiple sources of taking different parts of other religions and incorporating it, because it doesn't matter because we're all Brahmin anyway. To them, it all goes to the same place. When we get to Baha'i faith, Baha'i, that one I know a little bit about, there are 9 major ways to get to God. Well, in Hinduism, there's millions of ways to get to God, to understand God. And there is no Holy Spirit, by the way. There's no such thing as that. Salvation, according to Hinduism, is released from the cycles of reincarnation. That's when you become, quote, saved. How do you do so? You achieve it through yoga and meditation. Yoga and meditation. And it can take many lifetimes to get out of this, what do you call it? What do you call this thing? This recycle. I forget the term that the Buddhists use, but anyway, the point being is it's constant recycling and reincarnation. Now, how do you get out of it for good? What's the final one? Well, the final reincarnation is when you become, and I know, don't make fun, you become one with the universe. And that's a quote. One or union with Brahman. When you are no longer needed because you've hit a state of enlightenment where you are no longer needed to go through the process of reincarnation. Okay, so let me go through some other facts and stuff. Most Hindus believe in Brahman, and Brahman is defined as an uncreated, eternal, infinite, transcendent, all-embracing principle. That's the way they define it. It's more or less a force. And so when I tell you that Star Wars is Eastern mysticism, that's what it is. It's an all-encompassing, all-embracing, infinite, transcendent, eternal, uncreated, which we agree with that, uncreated principle. And that's what the Jedis were into, the Force. It's everywhere, no matter what. And if you've not seen The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, find somebody who has it. It's really interesting. 8 episodes. It really is fascinating. And the Force is introduced there. Brahman is the sole reality. It's the ultimate cause, the foundation, the source and goal of all existence. So when a Hindu says they're going to be religiously following Hinduism, they're after Brahman in of itself. And since Brahman is in all things, and the self, otherwise known as Atman, which I already explained, I think, in the Buddhist Atman, of all living beings, Brahman is the transformer and the reabsorber of everything. So when you die, you go back to Brahman and you are reincarnated into some other form. Hindus differ in several different things, including the qualities of Brahman. Is it impersonal or is it personal? There's some arguments there between, there are three big ones: Vishnu, Shiva, and what's the other one? God, there's another one. I think it's called Shakti, Shakti, I think. And they all have different views of how personal or impersonal said Brahman is. Hindus don't call it reincarnation either. They call it transmigration and rebirth. They believe it's cyclical with no beginning or end per se until Brahman decides that it's connected. And there's an endless series of rebirths, and I mean an endless season. From a Hindu standpoint, people who have not fully realized that their being is in Brahman, you're just flat out ignorant and deluded, so don't worry about that. How do you become better in your reincarnation? Well, not only with better karma, but also with the idea where you respond in love to a personal expression of the divine. In other words, when you see the divine Brahman working, you're supposed to have some sort of reaction in love, in particular with other living beings. It's one reason why they don't like killing cows. They don't like killing rats, because they think that might be Uncle Fred being reincarnated, either good or bad, and they want to be very careful. It is a crime to kill a cow in India because you may be running into a relative. That's one reason. It's kind of weird because when you think of the chickens and the goats and the stuff that they have in India all over the place for food, they got to be very careful which ones that the Hindu doctrine says are not a part of the reincarnation process. Another way that they say that you can realize and learn the lesson of Brahman is this waking consciousness business. And that's why they do yoga. It's this transcendental unity with the world. It's that idea where you go out onto a ocean beach and you sit cross-legged and put your hands out in the little V circle, you know what I'm talking about? And you sit it on your knees and you're trying to triangulate your energy, right? To Brahman, which it represents the ocean. Remember the raindrop, the nothingness of Buddhism? Well, Hinduism is similar, except there's lots and lots of gods all around you, and you're trying to get with one with them. They argue that that is best reflected, and a taste of that unity is when you have sleep without dreams. When you have sleep without dreams, you are now a part of Brahman. Dreams are your hang-ups. And again, I don't mean to be funky here and keep on saying the same thing, but when we hit Scientology, you're going to hear a lot of the same words, except that it's $175 an hour to get your hang-ups removed. I so want to be a Scientologist engram. It's so easy. I could make a fortune. Anyway, okay, 7:27. I got 3 minutes. If you got any comment or questions, are the Sikh part of Hindu? Yes. In a nutshell, yes. However, Sikhs are a variant. Remember, there's dozens of variants inside of Hinduism, and Sikh is just one of them. The way I look at it, I don't even call it a Hindu. I just call it Eastern mysticism. Buddhism There is so Zoroastrianism. There are so many of them, of these variants, that I can't even tell you. And being a Sikh is just one. They got big temples, and it's the same kind of thing where they do meditative principles. You'd have to look that up on Google though to find out exactly what, what line. It all depends. I think Sikhs are divided into five segments of Sikhs. It all depends on which one you're talking about. Okay. Anything else? Going once. There's a big one in South Seattle. If you're wanting to see a giant Sikh temple, I mean, it's 4,000 some odd people. So.
Ed,
yeah.
Is Buddhism larger than Hinduism?
No. Hinduism's bigger than Buddhism, generally speaking. Let's just put it this way. Buddhism, one of the reasons why Islam, we'll get to Islam next week, but the reason why Islam spread anywhere, besides the fact they were killing everybody, was the fact that they had Muslim traders. People would go trading, right? Hinduism is more or less centered in the Indian Peninsula and Nepal and Tibet and places like that. But Buddhism has made inroads all over Southeast Asia. So, it's very difficult to read where the numbers really are. But I think Hinduism is probably bigger. Let me see if I got any notes about that. I don't see any notes, but I can't imagine Buddhism being bigger than Hinduism, but it's possible. Somebody can look it up. Okay, anything else? I got all of 1 minute. Surely, let me think. I'll pick on somebody. Aaron, what top of your mind?
There we go. Well, is it the Hindu that has this dot on their foreheads?
Yeah, that ash mark thingy.
Is that just to show that that's their religion, or what's the point of that?
Yeah, you'd have to look that up. I don't know the answer to that. It just is to me. Normally, I don't even know if they are off of. Most of them are women that have that mark.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen the man. There must be something. I don't know the answer to that.
Curious. Our next door neighbor is from India, and his parents came to visit, and I think it was his mom who had the.
Does he have it?
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah, I think it's a woman mark for some reason. I'm not sure why. Yeah, don't know. I've always thought that if I wasn't a Christian, I'd rather be a Buddhist. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, for crying out loud, they avoid the stupid suffering. Are you kidding me? That's a win. That's like the prosperity guy is saying, "Oh, let's just all be rich and healthy." And okay, sign me up for that one too. I mean, geez, just Buddhism. Sit on an ocean beach with my arms crossed and yay. Okay.
What's the difference with the Sikhs that wear the headdress versus the regular?
Well, again, it's just like all of these ones that we just got through mentioning, there are lots and lots of variants. They are different. And most of them are different on the outside, like the mark, the hat. In Judaism, for an example, I can't remember how many, but it's like a dozen. The hat, what it's made out of, whether it's velvet, whether it's tilted, whether it's got a rounded thing, whether it's square, whether it's got little things on the side of it, those are all different sect. S-E-C-T. They're all sects. Well, Sikh, S-I-K-H, is a sect of, I believe it's Hinduism. And there are, I think, 5 distinct different sects of them. Some of them believe that hat thing has a religious meaning. Some of them have the hat thing only on for a certain amount of time, and then they take this thing off. Some of them, if they're out in public, they have it on. When they're not with friends, they don't have it on. I mean, it all depends on what sect they're a part of. Christians, there's nothing really, we don't normally think like that. The only thing that I can think of ever is if you're a part of the Plymouth Brethren. Plymouth Brethren, the women wear doilies. And literally doilies, like on a lamp, you know, the little white lace looking thing you put the lamp on. They wear it because they believe in head coverings. And they don't believe you should be worshiping or communing in communion without a woman having their head covered. I don't know what they do with the holy kiss thing for men, but they definitely think about the women and the doily thing. But other than that, you can't tell a Southern Baptist different from a Presbyterian, unless you go into their church service, then you see the Presbyterians all in robes on the stage, whereas Southern Baptists often aren't. But I mean, but in Eastern stuff, man, they've got all sorts of outer, when you talk about Greek Orthodox or Orthodox of any type, Syrian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Orthodox, anything, they have symbols for all sorts of stuff, like lampstands and cups and colors and stain on their, it means things. Whereas in the Protestant world, it doesn't mean, those kind of things don't mean much. I mean, the best we have is a cross, right? An empty cross. We run that around a lot. Catholics have the body still on it. Have you ever noticed that the Jesus's body is on there? And the reason why is because they keep on killing him every time they meet, because that's what a mass is for, is to re-kill Jesus. That's the whole idea, because they never believe that they're saved, so they have to re-crucify Jesus in the mass ceremony. That whole thing is meant for that. And that's why transubstantiation matters to a Catholic, because the blood and body are actually the body and blood of Jesus, because he's dead again. So, you know, and that's why that body stays on that cross. It's a symbol. So Scott, I don't have an answer to you as to which, I'm just not an expert in the head coverings or I'm not even an expert in and I've been to Israel, I don't know how many times, in the Jewish hat thing. But when you see a guy with a hat, it depends on what, and the funny thing is, the different hat dudes, velvet, not velvet, sideways, rounded, square, brimmed, not quite as brimmed, you know, they don't like each other. They don't even talk to one another. Okay, then. Anyway, all right, I got to let you guys go. It is past 7:30. Thanks for being a part. Next week, well, you can see what we'll do. We'll pick it up with Islam and then go to whatever the next, let me look here. That's Hindu, Islam, Baha'i, Scientology, and Wicca. We will cover all those on Memorial Day weekend, and look for the recording if you can't be here. Otherwise, tell all your buddies and give them this link. Use the same link. It will work, supposedly. Again, same time, same bat station. And then Monday through Saturday at 2 o'clock, if you want to join us for a little more Q3, that's a discussion of almost anything, from good literature to good movies. Well, some bad movies, of course, if it has Nicolas Cage in it. And then we talk about all sorts of politics. Okay, take care. God bless. You're the best. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Yep.